I want to thank all of you for making the time to be not only on this call. I just want to thank all of you for being involved at Bakke Graduate University. I think that what God is doing through Bakke is amazing and outstanding, and all of you are benefiting. But I get so excited about the people that are going to benefit from you as you become even more effective as transformational leaders in the various spheres of influence around the world that God has given you. And this giftedness piece fits right into that. As I understand it, this particular course has to do with a theology of work, and giftedness is almost a subset, I guess I would say, of a theology of work. And I'm going to go ahead and put some slides on the screen. We're talking about work and a theology of work, and it's no surprise to most of you that there's kind of this question mark in most people's mind: is work a curse or a joy? And for many Christians, there's a question mark: is work really a curse or a joy? Most people in the world do not think of work as a joy. They at best think of it as a necessary evil, and many of them see it as a curse. And we kind of want to lean into that through this lens of giftedness. When I say most people think of work as a curse, I can give some statistics for that. These particular numbers that I'm going to give you, at least at the beginning, have to do with the situation here in the United States. We have a polling company called the Gallup organization, and since 2000, they have been keeping track of what they call employee engagement, which means the extent to which an employee feels engaged with their work. That is, they find a connection to the job. They find a sense of meaning in it. I think in popular terminology, we would say they put their heart in it. And as of 2017, Gallup has found that roughly a third, 33%, say they, or through the polling, they determine or are engaged. They work with passion. They feel a profound sense of connection to their work or their company, which sounds pretty good. But then you discover that another 51% are what they call not engaged. That is, their work is just a job. They do it, but their heart is not in the job. And then there's another 18% or 16%, I should say, that are what they label as actively disengaged. They hate their work. You know, they actually undermine the work that the engaged workers are doing. So if you put together not engaged and actively disengaged together, you've got 2/3 of the American workforce feel no personal stake in their job. At best, it's just a job. It's just a paycheck. And on the far end, it's a curse. My recollection is that the numbers for employee engagement worldwide are that the people that are disengaged or actively disengaged is upwards to 87% worldwide. In other words, most people in the world look at work as pretty much of a curse. And yet, we know from Genesis that God gave us work to actually bless the world. Work was meant to be a blessing. The very first words that God says to human beings after he creates them have to do with their work. And you know the Genesis 1 passage. He says, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and rule over it." And he wants us to make the world fruitful. On its own, the world is not very fruitful. It just gives us raw resources. Only human beings can add value to make the world fruitful and to be a blessing. And we have the same thing picked up repeatedly in Scripture. I'm just going to give you a few passages, but in the Psalms, he says that, Psalm 8, that God has made us rulers, which means we have a stewardship over the world, which is a noble kind of concept. He says in Proverbs, someone skilled in their work will serve before kings. It has that idea that there's a There's a nobility about work, and that the people that do work well, they advance and they get recognized. And here again, you've got this connection between work and kings. There's responsibility. There's respect. In Psalms again, David says, we've got food that comes from the earth, and wine that gladdens human hearts, and oil to make their faces shine, and bread that sustains their hearts. These are all pictures of an agricultural culture which is flourishing, and through those food products, blessing the people of the land. Again, in Ecclesiastes, Solomon says, make the most of what God gives, both the bounty and the capacity to what? To enjoy it, accepting what's given, and delighting in the work. It's God's gift. Work was intended to be a blessing. And then in the New Testament, Colossians 3:23, Paul is addressing slaves in the Greco-Roman world there in Ephesus. And oddly enough, he tells slaves, Christian slaves, do your work heartily as unto the Lord. That word heartily is a very interesting word. It means, it's the word psyches, which we get psyche from. But the idea is do your work from the heart, with all your heart. Put your heart into it. Do it wholeheartedly, we would say. In other words, there's a connection that Paul, it's a virtual command, but he's directing people to find a way to put heart into their work, all that they have into it, even the menial work of slaves. So how does that, square with what most people's experience is? Obviously, it's a vast difference. Most people don't experience work with any sort of enthusiasm. And of course, we know why that's the case. Genesis 3, Adam and Eve ate the fruit, and God said, on the day you eat of it, you will die. And he cursed the ground, and work had already existed, but the ground was now cursed, which made work toilsome. And by the sweat of your brow, you will eat. This whole thing of whether work is a joy or a curse fits heavily into the issue of calling. And giftedness and calling go hand in glove. And in our culture, and really around the world, anybody who has options about what they do for work is faced with this question, what should I do with my life? I would point out to all of you that this question nobody asked 1,000 years ago, even a couple of hundred years ago. Most people never asked this question. This is a fairly new question in the world's history. And that's because the nature of work changed about 85 years ago. After World War II, the nature of work actually changed. Prior to that, most all the work in the world was done on farms and in factories. And in those economies, one strong back is as good as another. But after World War II, we have the rise of what Peter Drucker called knowledge work. That is, people are working with information. They're using their minds. And in that economy, you can't just plug and play people. And there's more options for what people would do. And so people are confronted, usually at around age 18, 20, 24, somewhere in there, the question, what should I do with my life? And in the United States, the millennials are basically the third generation in history that's had to answer that question. And for the most part, they are lost as lambs trying to figure that out. If you're a Christian, you go to your pastor and you ask the question, how do I find my calling? Which is really that question, what should I do with my life? Many of you that are on this call may have asked your pastor that question, or a Christian leader. How do I find my calling? Well, we already know the answer that you're going to get. This is the answer that's been in place for roughly the last 85 to 100 years. And the answer is, well, there's three things you need to do. You need to read your Bible, you need to pray, and you need to seek godly counsel. And sometimes they'll throw in a fourth one, which is you should seek the leading of the Lord. Now, I don't mean to be critical, but in a way, that last one is sort of an admission. I don't really know what to tell you. And how is this working? Well, not well. Barna is another organization like Gallup, only it's primarily concerned with the Christian world. And they do a lot of research on Christians, particularly in America. And back in 2014, they did a survey to find out how many church-going Christians know what God wants them to do with their life. And they found that about 40% feel like they have some clear sense of what God wants them to do, but about 60% have no idea what God wants me to do with my life. And it's not because they didn't read their Bible, and it's not because they didn't pray, and it's not because they didn't seek godly counsel or even seek the leading of the Lord. Somehow that formulation, all of those activities are good and they need to be done, but somehow that has not helped people figure out what to do with their life. And you'll notice that that statistic is kind of similar to the 2/3 of the workforce who feel no personal stake in their job. So we've got this big disconnect between the idea that work is supposed to be a joy, and that God has a calling for people's lives, and yet so many people miss that. So what are we going to do about that? God wants us to be fruitful, and to each and every person, he's given a means of causing the world to be fruitful, to make the world flourish. And that means is what we call your giftedness. To every person, God has given a means of adding value to the world and its resources that can cause the world and its people to flourish. So let's talk about this phenomenon of giftedness. It's meant to bless the world. Giftedness is a combination of motivation and ability. You got to have both of those. It's not a psychological model. It's a motivational thing. It's a behavioral thing. And you've got to have this combination of motivation, which has to do with desire, as well as ability, which has to do with some aptitude or skill. You can see how this works. You could have an ability, but no motivation to use it. I have worked with people who had significant ability at playing the piano, but they had no motivation to play the piano. They just happened to be good at it. And then on the other side, you've got people that are very motivated, for example, to sing. They sing in the shower, but when they try to go to church and join the ensemble at their church and be a part of that, it doesn't work out so well because they really don't have an ability to sing. They're off key. They don't have rhythm. They have a desire, a motivation, but they don't have an ability. But wherever we see motivation and ability working together, we have what we call giftedness. And the telltale sign that your giftedness is engaged in an activity is that you take joy or satisfaction from the doing of that activity. You gain energy from doing it. So let me just add, giftedness then is what you're born to do. Okay, it's not just what you can do, it's what you're born to do. And of course, you're born to do that because, in fact, it's about what God made you to do. So one person is motivated to solve problems. They never met a problem they didn't want to solve. But somebody else, they're motivated to reach a goal, get a result, get a finished product, get to the end. Somebody else, they want to understand something at a very deep level, wrap their mind around a particular topic or subject and get an encyclopedic knowledge of that thing. Somebody else, they have an idea in their imagination, a concept, and then they want to render it in some way, bring it into the real world so the rest of us can access it and see that concept and engage with it. Somebody else has a knack, an ability, a motivation to influence people's behavior, and maybe they end up in sales or something. Somebody else, they want to get things exact and precise, like right on the money, no mistakes. And this is the kind of person I want on the job if ever I have brain surgery. I don't want somebody, for whom good enough is good enough. No, I want somebody who's going to get it exact and precise. And then you have people that are just motivated to be part of a team. Doesn't matter necessarily that they're leading the team. They just want to be in partnering, in collaboration with other people to accomplish a joint effort. And this is a good thing because most of the work in the world is accomplished not by individuals, but by teams of individuals working together. And then there's people who are what we call plan and produce. Plan your work, work your plan. They love to structure and organize a set of processes and line up all the ducks, the logistics, and get an outcome. And then there's people whose motivation is really built around learning, particularly skills and techniques, functionality. So this week they're learning surfing, and they kind of get into surfing well enough to go out and surf and do well with it. And then after 6 months, that kind of pans out, and they try hang gliding, and that's pretty fun for a while. And then when they were learning how to hang glide, they met somebody from Italy, and they thought Italian sounded really beautiful, and so they get into learning Italian. And through that, they discover Italian food, and they begin to learn about cooking. And basically, these people are always on a learning curve somewhere, and their life is a portfolio of learning adventures. Then there's people who are born to impact others. They often appear in public, and they will make speeches, or they will say powerful things that change minds, that change hearts, that move people to action, that make a difference. And then there's people who just want to excel and be the best. They are not satisfied with second best. And every 4 years, we have something called the Olympics, and we see many of these people competing to be the best, and that's what drives their behavior. And then, believe it or not, there's some people who are motivated and gifted to the task of attracting eyeballs. They literally live to gain attention, which may sound a bit narcissistic, and of course the dark side of it is it can be, but they actually draw that attention so that they can take that attention somewhere, and they often end up as actors and actresses and public figures. There's all forms of giftedness. We could be here all day talking about the different kinds of giftedness that are out there, but it's about what you're born to do. Really, it shows up, I believe, from the womb, and it's, again, not something you learn to do, you go to school to become. It's part of who you are. It's part of how God has made you. God makes each and every human being uniquely. And if we press into that, we could talk about how he does that because for mysteries that we don't quite understand, we serve a God who loves to see himself in human form. Each of us images God in human form. I'm not saying we're gods. I'm saying that we're a tiny picture of some dimension of God that we otherwise wouldn't get to see. And when God looks at you doing the thing that he designed you to do, he takes great delight in that because he sees a picture of himself in human form, and he's the only person worthy of his own delight. But you get to share in that delight, as we'll see. Back in the 1920s, there was a man from Scotland named Eric Liddell, and Eric Liddell felt God calling him to China to be a missionary. So he went to train at Aberdeen in Scotland to prepare for that ministry. But while he was there, he was found to be very fast. And the Brits put him on their Olympic team for the 1924 Olympics, and he began to train, and he ultimately won his race in those Olympics. But as he's there at Aberdeen training, his sister, Jenny, is there with him, and she's kind of been out of shape because he's training so much that she's worried that he's lost his zeal for China, and she keeps nagging him about it. And in a movie that was made about Eric's life called Chariots of Fire, there's a scene in which Eric Liddell takes his sister out for a walk there in the Highlands one day, and he says, Jenny, listen, I believe God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. It's the best expression of giftedness I've ever heard. God made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. He never saw a race that he didn't want to get into. Well, the same thing is actually true for you. God has made you in a particular way. And when you do that thing that he put into you, you feel his pleasure. There's this release of joy and satisfaction in the doing of it. The pleasure is not the purpose of that gift. It's the purpose of the gift, as we find out from Ephesians 2:10, is that you would do the good works that God has already prepared for you to do. He's put you in the world to accomplish something. But he puts the pleasure in the doing of that gift kind of like a sweetener, because he wants you to come back and do that thing again and again and again. And you wouldn't if you didn't enjoy the doing of it. Guess what, though? Most people have no idea what their giftedness is. They all have a giftedness, but most people don't have much idea of what it is. They may have a fairly rudimentary sense that they're, quote, good at something, or they like this or that, or, they're pretty good with numbers, or I hear people say a lot, oh, Bill, I'm a people person, whatever that means. But I have been doing this work that I do for the last 25 years, really virtually my whole career, and have discovered that most people really have no idea what their giftedness is. And I would say that the vast majority of people in the world don't even know about the concept of giftedness. It's never been mentioned to them. You on this call, by virtue of what we've already talked about today, already know more than 99.999% of the world's population about giftedness. Well, why would it be that most people have no idea what it is if in fact, everybody has this giftedness? Well, there's probably several reasons, not the least of which is that Genesis 3, the curse, the fall. There's some things that we're not seeing that God intended us to see, but it also goes to the nature of giftedness itself. Think about this way. You live inside your skin, right? Physically, you live inside a body, a skin. And as a result, it's a physical impossibility to see your own face. You can see every other face in the world, but the one face you'll never see is your own face. You can't have an out-of-body experience to see that. You can look in a mirror to see it, but even then, it's a reflection. Well, the same thing is true of your giftedness. You live inside your skin. You see other people use their giftedness, and sometimes it looks pretty impressive. But when you use your own giftedness, you don't think about using it. You just use it. You wouldn't think of doing life any other way. And as a result, it just proves a bit elusive. Well, I think that there's a big connection between the fact that most people have no idea what their giftedness is and this whole idea of whether work is joyful or a curse. Whether they put their heart into their work, as Paul encourages us to do, or not. Whether they don't put their heart into it and they feel it more as a curse. If you don't know what your giftedness is, it's going to be hard to get into work that fits you. And in the book that you read chapter 2 from, The Person Called You, of course, I unpack this whole concept of giftedness and the phenomenon of giftedness, talk about what it is, where it came from, how you find it. And then the book talks about the implications of giftedness for work as well as for relationships and some other things. So we're not going to unpack the whole book today, but I certainly would encourage you to, you can download a copy of this book from several online sources, and there's the assessment, of course, in the back to discover your giftedness. And as Larry said, that exercise that's in the back, I have a process for training people to use it to help other people discover something about their giftedness and then apply those insights in a meaningful way to their work or their relationships. And I call them giftedness coaches. And if you take the personal assessment class here at BGU, then you will go through that exercise. And quite likely you'll have a session, another Zoom session in that class with me, because I come in and work with Yvonne McKenzie and those cohorts to do that. And in fact, in my own DTL program, I'm working on a giftedness coaching certificate program, because my desire is that we make this process available as widely as possible so that people can discover their gifts and get into the place of fruitfulness that God has for them. God's given us this giftedness to make the world flourish, but the giftedness, it determines whether or not we're going to do that through what we call job fit. And I want to give you a framework. When we talk about how do you know whether or not a job fits somebody, is it the right job for them? Just want to give you kind of a model or a framework to think about this with. And then we'll be done, and we'll have some time for some conversation and questions. But job fit is pretty simply illustrated by two boxes that overlap to one degree or another. Okay. In the top box, we're going to look at you. And what we're trying to figure out is, what is it that you love to do? And not like to do. You know, if people did what they like to do, maybe they'd sit home and watch TV all day. Maybe they'd go to the racetrack all day. Maybe they'd go hiking. Well, those are nice leisure activities, but when we talk about love to do, we're talking about love to do in the sense of that Eric Liddell, God made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. Never met a race that he didn't want to run. It's what he was born to do. And so this top box, we're trying to figure out, what is it that you love to do and are born to do? And the process in the back of my book will help you do that by telling some stories, certain kinds of stories, and then looking for some patterns in those stories that point to what it is that you consistently love to do. So that's the top box. In the bottom box, we look at you relative to some context, like a job, a position, a career. Only we'll look at that job or position or career through the same lens of motivation as we look at you. And we ask the question, what's required to satisfy the expectations of whoever's paying for that job or position or career? The word's not on the slide, but just to the right of that bottom box, you could put the word expectations. Hiring is all about expectations. An employer has a job, a function that they want done, and they have a picture in their mind of what success for that function looks like. And whatever it takes to deliver that picture of success, those are the real motivational requirements of the job. By the way, those expectations may not always be clearly articulated, which is one of the problems when you go to look for a job. You have to sort of tease out, what are they really looking for here? That's a whole nother conversation. Point is that to the extent that these two boxes overlap, that what you love to do matches up with what's required to satisfy the expectations of the job, you have what we call good fit, right? Because when you put energy in to do what's required, you actually get a net gain of energy back because you love to do that thing. You do that all day long. But there's parts of the boxes that don't overlap, and that's where all the challenges come from. So this part of the bottom box doesn't match you, but it's part of the job. So what do? Well, you have to extend yourself out to cover that because it is indeed required. Only now you're working out of what we call can do. You can do it, but you don't love to do it. And the problem with a can do is the arrow only goes one way. You put energy in, but you get no energy back. What I'm trying to avoid is the situation where people's boxes are way out of alignment. They have all this can do energy that's going out, and very little is coming back. the job doesn't fit them. And that's not sustainable. That's a recipe for burnout. And I see this every day in my practice. People that are in situations like this come to me and they say, Bill, I hate my job. And sure enough, we investigate their giftedness and what they were born to do. And we discover that none of that is being asked for in the job that they have. And by contrast, they're being asked to do a lot of things that they were never designed to do in the first place. So it doesn't work. This is, I believe, one way to understand how it is that so many of the people in the world, in the workforce, feel no personal stake in their job. They're doing work that doesn't fit them, and they're doing work that doesn't fit them in large measure because they don't know what kind of work would fit them, because they don't really know their giftedness. They don't know what they were born to do. Through no fault of their own, I'm point out. As I say, they live inside their skin. And I would also say that our world has not really developed much of a framework to help people get from their late teen years into the adult world of work. Everybody assumes that college education is going to help them figure that out, but it doesn't. The reality is that colleges have no vested interest in helping people figure out what to do with their lives. And as I say, here in the United States, we've got a whole generation of millennials that are lost as lambs, trying to figure out what they should end up doing. So just reinforce the point that people don't have an idea what their giftedness is. That leads to misfit. And so some of the symptoms of misfit are boredom on the job. People come in late, they leave early, they take breaks, a lot of complaints about your work. They have a hard time concentrating on the job. There's all kinds of emotional issues. They may have conflicts with their supervisor or their coworkers. Toward the end of it all, there's physical symptoms: stress, tension, headaches, losing sleep, gaining weight. The family doesn't like the way your job affects you. They wonder why you're coming home in such a surly mood. It is also possible that you can actually do work that makes everybody at work happy. You're doing a great job. Problem is, you're not happy. It doesn't fit you. You're not gaining energy, even if you're satisfying those expectations of the employer. So what would fit look like? Well, fit means that the work feels deeply fulfilling. There's a sense of meaning in it. Sometimes you get lost in the activity. You're so into it. You get consistent thanks and praise for the work that you do. You're constantly seeing ways to do it even better. It's engaging to you. It's energizing. You require less supervision because you're doing such a great job. One of the telltale signs that work fits you is that you do it well even when you don't feel well. You may be under the weather physically, but you can go in and do the job because you just gain energy doing it. The family knows you love your work. They can feel it. Your kids can feel it. And then there's a sense of gratitude. You walk away at the end of the day going, wow, I have the best job in the world. Today was worth doing. Yeah, I'm tired here at the end of the day. Glad to go home, take a break. But I am so thankful that God's given me this job. That's what work looks like when you put your heart into it. And my premise is that it's a lot easier to put heart into your work, as Paul urges us, if you're doing work that fits you. I would say that in my work, I find it it's very, very difficult for somebody who's in a terrible job fit to put their heart into it, because they have to gin up tremendous energy to do that. And I think this issue of job fit is a huge piece of reversing that curse and helping people discover joy in the work. But the question is really posed to all of us. You know, the original question that was posed to Eve is, did God really say? Can we really trust what he said? And the question is it really a joy? Did he really intend work to bless the world? I believe he did. I believe there's a way to get that. And I believe that giftedness is a big piece of that. So, giving you an overview there of giftedness, and I know we have some time left here to where's my screen?
Should be right up at the top.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stop sharing. This.
Oh, there it is. Yep.
Yeah. Good. Oh,
so let me pause there, and I hope I've provoked a whole lot of questions here, both through the reading and through the presentation, and I'm most interested in now getting into your questions and what is on your mind. And Larry, if you have any comments you want to throw in here, that's fine.
Yeah, that was tremendous. I just thank you so much, and I'm so glad this is being recorded, and of course this is going to be available to you. You can go back
Great.
and access this whole slide presentation that Bill has given his lecture here. This is excellent. I'm just reminded of something you just said. We're going to have a case study later in the course of a guy who was he was selling cars actually in California, and his pastor told him he wanted him to come up to something higher, and so the guy went on the mission field because his pastor insisted he should, and he turned out to be just sick. He finally went to a doctor. So it was exactly what you said, exactly. So we'll cover that. I think it's in week 5, something like that. So anyway, yeah, let's just open it up to questions, and I'm sure you've got some comments or questions. Hitchhike on anything that he said, maybe some of your own experience.
Yeah, and if you have a question, make sure you unmute your mic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that helps.
Well, I can go first, Bill. I mean, this is my second time with you, but as we read the Bible, every time we see something new, it's something that comes across differently, and we understand, or something else just comes up. So I'm happy to have this presentation again, because I'm looking at giftedness in a new way, and understanding it as far as work is concerned. And living in a developed country, quite often people take a job because it's what you have. It's not necessarily what you want to do, and people live in this world for years. How do we reconcile doing something, as you said, that you can do? It's not what you want to do. You're a country of nearly 3 million, and so the options aren't great. And they'll tell you that, well, do what you can until something else comes up. It never comes up, maybe. What do you recommend for you might have staff members, I have team members who are probably working with me because that's what they can do, what they can get. But you still want to have a level of motivation, and you want them to really, use the gifts that God gave them. How would you see that? What would you recommend? Because maybe some of us are not doing what we're supposed to do either. As students here at Bakke, and we have team members in the same boat.
Yes. Well, let me come at this, Jacqueline, from a sort of 30,000 foot view, and then I'll zoom down to the specifics of what you're asking. Oftentimes when I make this presentation, I get asked some form of the question, Bill, it sounds like, giftedness is a bit of a luxury. I mean, if you live in a highly developed country that has a lot of options, a lot of freedom and latitude, you maybe can, and if you got education, you maybe, can pick and choose among jobs, but most of the people in the world don't have that. So it sounds like giftedness is like a luxury. And my answer is, well, giftedness is not a luxury, it's a reality. It's simply the way the world is, it's the way human beings are. The rice farmer in the paddy in North Korea has every bit as much giftedness as anybody else in the world. What they're lacking, of course, is options and freedom. And wherever you see people have freedom and they have opportunity, giftedness flourishes. And the proof of that is the microloan industry. You know, oh, I'm sorry, I heard a voice. I thought somebody was asking something. Yeah, so somebody is in a village, and you know, but he's very poor because he can't get his bananas to the city to the market. So somebody makes a loan to him. He buys a bike, and next thing you know, he can get to the city and make some money, and now there's some flourishing going on. You know, or a couple of women buy a sewing machine, and they're really quite good at making clothes, and next thing you know, they're feeding their families, and now they're employing other people. So human flourishing and giftedness go hand in glove. My own view is that we as a race, as a human race, we've seen various pockets of, you know, flourishing here and there down through history, but for the vast majority of people, they in fact do live under that curse, in the sense that, I mean, we all live under that curse, but in the sense that most of humanity historically has not really flourished very much. You know, they have they've not had options, they've not had freedom, and lacking those, their gifts can't do much to express themselves. I like to think that in the last 100 years or more, again, with the advent of knowledge work, we've got a lot more options in the world than we ever had back when we were just farming and later doing factories. Having said that, you raise a great point. What about a developing country that the options are limited? There's only certain jobs available. There's not a lot of opportunity to, you know, move up and down in the job market. And the answer to that is, A, you find the best fit that you can, which may not be a great fit. It may be far from the perfect job for you. B, whatever job you take, you see the extent to which you can, in a wise way, employ your gifts to get that job done. In other words, sometimes you can shape the job to fit how you would do things. And this is particularly true if you work with your boss to help them understand, help them understand how you operate, what you need by way of supervision, and make sure you understand what their expectations are. And then a third part of that, Jacqueline, is fortunately, giftedness is not limited to our work space. I go back to those folks in North Korea, and they're basically enslaved, and they have very few options. They work very, very hard. But you got to know that giftedness is there. And what's interesting is, you know, maybe they go home at night, and with the little that they have, nonetheless, they start to notice that, you know, this person is really good at weaving, and this person seems to have a knack for telling stories, and this person is the person you go to when you need some insight into a problem that you're facing. And so, to the extent you know what your gifts are, you seek to employ them avocationally, meaning outside work. I have a client, a friend who is an accountant here in the United States, but his real giftedness is in theater. He should be an actor somewhere on a stage, but he can't just quit his accounting job. He's got kids that he's got to support in college and so forth, and he probably couldn't make enough money as an actor to support himself anyway. What he has done is continued to work faithfully as an accountant, But on the weekends and in the evenings, he gets involved in community theaters here in the area, and he just loves it. And he's probably in a production every other month, and that work with these other actors gives him energy with which to go back and do the accounting job, which is definitely not a great fit. And by the way, there's one other thing I want to say about that guy. His name is Tom. He had been in this community theater for a while, and for many theater troupes, when they put on a play, and then after the play, the actors and actresses meet backstage, and they sort of have a ritual where they celebrate the performance and they talk about the highs, and they just kind of encourage each other before they disperse. Well, one night he's back there in that celebration, and they all know he's a Christian. And he said, everybody's excited, and he says, "This is great. Hey, can I say a prayer?" And everybody's like, "Yeah, that's a great idea." And so he prays. And this becomes part of the ritual. The next week, somebody says, "Tom, say that prayer again." And so it becomes part of the ritual. And after a while, he comes to the prayer part, and somebody says, "Tom, before you pray, would you pray for my daughter? She's sick. Would you pray for my son in college? He's got a big exam tomorrow." And he's suddenly like the guy who's the prayer chaplain for these people. And then after about 8 months of that, he had to leave early one night after the performance. He had to pick his wife up at the airport or whatever. And so he said, "Guys, I got to run early tonight." And somebody said, "Oh, no, you can't leave yet. You haven't said the prayer." And he sent out an email to those of us who, are encouraging him. And he said, "I discovered in that moment why God gave me that gift." He said, "I believe it was to put me in this place with these people, because I discovered through that I'm probably the only person they know who knows Jesus. And it's my ministry to them to be able to share Christ with them in that way." And so these gifts go way beyond just, earning a living. They're really part of our calling in this world. It's how God wants us to be in the world, which transcends into our homes, our communities, our neighborhoods, everything that we do, as well as how we make a living. I think you're muted, Jacqueline. I can't hear you.
So we can say that work is everything that we do for God, whether it's for pay or just who we interact with. We can see that as work for God.
Oh, absolutely. There's in the theology of work, we talk about work as worship, and technically everything we do should be worship. So
right.
Those two words kind of go hand in glove.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was a great question, Jackie. Excellent response. Anybody else? I think Clipper's got his hand up.
Yes, please.
Hi, Clifford.
Yes, thank you, Bill, for a very good presentation. I think one of the reasons why I joined BGU was to help me learn so that I can practice what I'm learning right on my job. And now I'm seeing that that has already started to happen, because the presentation that you have made is in the context of where I'm working. Just for the sake of you to know, I'm working as an executive director of a non-profit NGO where I am having 103 employees rightly as I'm talking now. And I stay right in the compound. And the topic of giftedness, I found it to be very relevant because I read chapter 2, and also from the presentation that you have made has given me an understanding to say, if I have people who are gifted in the work, the results for sure will be better.
Yes.
Now I have a question. You mentioned that you help people discover their giftedness.
Yes.
Maybe can you share the process? What process do you go through to help people, realize their own giftedness? Also, should we say that the job interview can help someone realize or know the fit, to say, okay, because you attended the interview, you responded very well to the questions, it means that's your gift for you in the job, and for sure you're going to perform well. How do you relate job interview for the employees, also the giftedness itself, the process to help people discover their own giftedness? I'm interested to know that, because I feel like it may also help me, just currently as I'm working to align people very well according to their gifts so that they can perform better in the workplace. Thank you.
So I'm hearing two parts to the question. One is how to help people discover their giftedness, and then when you're getting ready to hire someone, how to use that job interview to begin to determine whether they have the giftedness for the work you want them to do.
Yes.
Great. Let's take those in turn. When we talk about how to help people discover their giftedness, we're into the whole realm of what is called assessment. Remember what I said about how the nature of work changed about 85 years ago to knowledge work. It was about that same time that anybody began to pay attention to looking inside people, if you will, to figure out how do you add value. In a way, the beginnings of this, I won't give you too much history, but the beginnings of this go back to a gentleman named Frank Parsons, back in Boston in about the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s. Frank Parsons had been a political activist, but he noticed that farm boys were coming to Boston to get various kinds of jobs. And he asked the question, how do we know what kind of job to put them in? So he began a process of interviewing these boys to find out about their interests, what experience they had, what backgrounds they had, what education they had. And he's really the father of what we call assessment. Later, the military got into this in a big way. There were IQ tests that were developed. There were skills inventories. There's interest inventories. And if you plotted assessment, the history of assessment, it's just like a hockey stick. All these attempts to figure out, how does this person, all these attempts to describe a human being. That's a little more challenging than it sounds, because you've got to figure out what is really relevant and meaningful and helpful. And how do you do that? How do you get the person? How do you discover what's in the person? Most all of those assessments end up comparative. You may be familiar with StrengthsFinder, Myers-Briggs, DISC. As I say, there's thousands of assessments that are out there. And what they do is they give you an inventory of questions that are what we call forced choice questions, which means somebody has given you 2 or 3 or 4 options that you now select from. And you have to self-appraise which of those options best describes you. And that assumes that you know yourself well enough to answer the question accurately. It also assumes that you have no reason to answer it otherwise from what you really believe about yourself, perhaps because you want a job. And as I say, they're all comparative. You become a type of person. You're in this category. You have this percentage of the norm for some trait or whatever. The process that I use is categorically different. The process I use is story-based. The way giftedness works is it's a pattern in a person's life. They come back to the same mode of functioning again and again and again and again. So think about some of those examples that I gave you. That first one was a person who loves to solve problems. If you went through their life history and asked them to tell you about moments when they were doing an activity that they enjoyed doing and they felt they did it well, you would hear a series of stories about solving one kind of problem or another. The kinds of problems may differ, but the same basic pattern of problem solving and going about it the same basic way would show up again and again and again and again. That pattern, I believe, points to their giftedness. And the telltale sign, remember, that giftedness is present is that you're gaining joy or satisfaction or energy from the activity. So all of that boils down to this. You have a person go back in their life and tell you about activities they've done that they've enjoyed doing and done well, from childhood all the way to the present. And you get about 6 or 8 or so of those stories. And if possible, you then sort of interview them, get them to tell the story in as much detail as possible. What did you do? How did you do it? When you say you organized it, what would I see you doing to organize it? When you say you led the team, what does that mean? What do I see you doing to lead the team? You try to get as much granular detail as possible. And when you've got about 8 of those stories, and you go back through, you'll start to see that there's dots that connect among the stories. Like every time the person was working with numbers, great stuff happened. Or in all of their stories, they're outside, not inside. Or in all of their stories, they're the captain of a team of some sort. They're the person that's taking key responsibility. And so this process of telling stories and looking for patterns is basically what that is. And in the back of my book and on my website, I have a process to help you do that if you want to look that up. And so that's how we determine what somebody's giftedness is. And the reason I like that approach more than these questionnaires and inventories is, first of all, it's right out of the person's life history. In other words, these are not subjective stories like I'm making something up. These things happen in the real world. If we'd had a video camera recording what they did when they were 5 years old, building, a little fort with their brother in the backyard, that's what we'd see is that story, what they just told us. So these are real things that are very objective. And then when you show the person a pattern, that begins to inform their life with a real sense of meaning. And when you put on top of that the idea that God made you that way, now that idea that God made you that way is not just a nice idea. I can see in my own life history, gosh, he really did. This is bearing out again and again and again. That pattern won't fundamentally change the rest of your life. And so it's very predictive in terms of career success and satisfaction. So that's essentially how we discover the person's giftedness. The question, well, what about a job interview? Somebody comes to apply for a job. How could you use that job interview to figure out whether they have the giftedness for what you need them to do? What I wouldn't recommend is that you ask them, let's say that the job is, I'll get some kind of background noise from somebody here. Somebody may want to mute your mic for a second.
Yeah, there we go.
Somebody comes for a job interview. I wouldn't, let's say the job is highly team oriented. In other words, you're looking for somebody who really loves to work on a team because it's collaborative work. I wouldn't sit down in the job interview as the hiring manager and say, well, this is a highly team oriented job. Do you feel that you're team oriented? Well, you know what they're going to say. Oh, Mr. Hendricks, I'm the most team oriented person you've ever met, because they want the job, right? And it's not so much like they're lying. It's just they want a job. So it's a little game, I think, that often gets played in the hiring situations. Is the hiring manager has this job here that has certain things in it, and the applicant is trying to figure out what it is that they're looking for, and then sort of plays to that. Whatever they're looking for, that's what I'm going to tell them, because I want the job, right? And they don't know anything about job fit, so they're liable to sign up for a job that doesn't fit them by that means. If you need a team-oriented person, I would go back to that storytelling. I would ask the person to tell you about 3 of the previous jobs that they've had and do a little interviewing to figure out, were they doing this work pretty much by themselves, or were they always involved with the team? And if they were involved with the team, you could ask a question like, okay, I see the team there. What was your role in the team? How did you contribute to the team? And so you don't give them yes or no questions. You give them questions where they've got to sort of tell a story, and it's in that story that you get to see them in action as it was back then. And you can begin to put some dots together to figure out, do they have some of the critical behaviors that you need in this particular job? The whole thing of interviewing people that's a whole nother giant subject, but that's the gist of it. Does that help, Clifford?
Yeah, thank you. It's clear. I did the strength finder.
Yes.
I think I should also try, or I should do the giftedness, because I find them to be slightly different.
Yes.
So maybe it's good to engage the giftedness approach, where you are looking at the patterns of life, and
Yes.
like the inventory and thank you very much. It's very clear, and looking forward to learn more on the giftedness.
Thank you, Clifford. I'm excited for you.
Yeah, very good. Anybody else have a question?
Yes, I have a question.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
This is Kunle.
Hello.
Kunle, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bill. I want to find out, how do you free up your giftedness? You talked about not imprisoning your giftedness, and that talking about nature and nurture. Sometimes your nature, I believe that's where your giftedness is, but sometimes nurture can imprison it. So I think environment in a way can limit the expression of your giftedness. What can one do if environment? Sometimes environmental issues could be financial. If somebody has challenges with money, he may be doing a job that he's not really gifted to do, and so he's compelled to stay on that job, and then his gifts will be idle or not be able to operate. So what can we do?
Yes, it's similar to the question that Jacqueline asked earlier. Let me talk about that nature versus nurture. That the giftedness is very much, inborn in my opinion, in my view. So it's very much nature, but that doesn't mean that nurture doesn't heavily influence it. And as an aside, I will point out that if you're a parent, if any of you have children, your children have a form of giftedness, and as a parent, you're in an opportunity to steward that child and their giftedness in a way that can help them thrive and flourish. And by the same token, if you don't do that, you can wound them or block their giftedness by the way that you parent them. My sister Bev Godby and I are actually working on a book that's kind of a sequel to The Person Called You, which should be out in about a year and a half, called The Person Called Your Child. And it's the implications of giftedness for parenting. And what we're trying to help parents see is there's a way, if you pay attention to your child's energy and where they put their energy, where they focus, where they spend more time than not, kind of what activities they keep coming back to, you'll start to notice little patterns of their gifts expressing themselves. And if you keep a journal of those patterns, just jot down little simple, today Johnny worked at a project all afternoon with some Legos or building blocks or whatever, and he was lost in the activity, and then the next day you write down something else that you observe. Over 8, 10, 12 years, you've got a mass of data. You'll start to see patterns, and then you can sort of get behind your child and honor those patterns and encourage them and give them opportunities. So the nurture part is heavily seen in the home. When you go in the workplace, you raise a great point, Kunle. It's quite likely that your employer has no idea about giftedness. and they don't pay attention to it. And in many cases, they just want a job done, and they don't really care whether you love the work, like the work, hate the work. They just want the work done. And I suppose one thought here is you can manage upwards. I realize different cultures do this differently, but to the extent possible, managing upwards means I go and I have a conversation with my boss, my supervisor, the company owner, whatever. You're welcome to tell them about this whole phenomenon of giftedness. They may find that fascinating. They'd never heard of that before, but it would be an eye-opener for them, and they might start to pay more attention to it. And even if you can't accomplish that, you could at least begin to have a conversation saying, you know, the way I go about this task is like this. If I had my way, I would go about doing the task this way. Would that be okay with you? I'm going to get the same result, and in fact, I might get a better result, but it'll actually make the work a lot better for me, and I want to do great work for you. So if you can work with me, and what you mean is work with my giftedness, I can do a better job for you. Not too many employers are going to not want that. And so that might be one way to kind of push back against the various sort of nature that's impinging or blocking your particular gifts. And you may be asking the question, what do you do about the two boxes being out of alignment? You know, where you've got a lot of can do. One other strategy you can use is to find somebody who has giftedness that you don't have, and you sort of strike an alliance with them. You get them to use their giftedness on your behalf. Give you an example of this. Let's say that your giftedness has all kinds of wonderful things in it, but you don't really have any giftedness for influencing people. That's not really something you do to get people to do what you want them to do, right? So you're in a meeting at your company, and you're supposed to, you have an idea that you think could really help, and you raise your hand, and they say, well, Bill, what do you have to say? And I throw an idea out there, and somebody says, well, I don't think we can do that, or I don't think we have the means of doing that. Well, if I don't have any influencing gift, I'm liable to just go, well, I guess we're not going to do that, and go silent. And yet it's a great idea. Well, the answer to that would be for me to go find somebody else in the group that I know who has a lot of influencing ability, and have a conversation with them and say, you know, I wasn't able to sell my idea to the team, but I still think it's a good idea. Do you think you could help me by promoting that idea with these folks? And if they think it's a good idea, they might say, well, fantastic, absolutely, I'd love to help you. So the next meeting, when it starts, that person speaks up and goes, hey, wait a minute. The last time we were together, Bill had an idea, and I think we kind of shot it down. But I went back and talked about it with him, and I've thought about it. I think it's a great idea, and I think we really need to take a look at it. And somebody once again says, yeah, but I don't think we're going to be able to do that. Well, let's worry about that later. Let's just, think this through for now, because I think we might be able to. I think we might be able to find a way. They're using their influencing gifts on your behalf. They're doing the heavy lifting, and you accomplish the objective that you wanted to accomplish. The answer to can do is never to try to turn it into a love to do. Never try to turn something that you don't have into somehow part of your giftedness. It won't work. The better strategy is to get somebody who does have that gift to use their gift on your behalf. So those are a couple ideas anyway.
Thank you. I like the last idea. That's a fantastic one.
Thanks, Manly.
And I think it reminds me about a husband and a wife coming together. Many times there is like a bolt and a nut, and what the bolt does not have, did not have, and then they can really form synergy.
Exactly. Exactly.
Bill, I just was reminded, you talked about the Lego blocks. We have a grandson who, from the time he could do it, he was always engaged in Lego blocks all the way up through high school. He just graduated from the University of Washington as an architect, and now he's working in an architectural firm. So that's right on the money.
Yeah, I frequently will hear stories about Lego blocks from people that have ended up in engineering or architecture or construction of some sort. It's just fascinating how that works.
Good. Who's next? Another question. These are great questions. Keep them coming.
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, Abraham.
Okay. The first question I have is, how do we reconcile giftedness with Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10? That say, whatsoever your hand findeth to do, do it with all your heart. Then the second question is, I work in an educational institution, and there are some times that there's a conflict between the giftedness of the students and the career choice. So how do you help such students when there's a conflict between the career choice and the giftedness of a student? Thank you.
Could I ask you to repeat that first question? I caught part of it, but not all of it.
Okay, the first question is, how can we reconcile giftedness with Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10 that says, whatsoever your hand findeth to do, do it with all your heart? I want you to reconcile giftedness with Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10.
Reconcile giftedness with the
Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10.
Okay.
Abraham, could you type that out in the chat box? Type out your question in the chat box for us.
While you're doing that, let me speak into the second question about you've got a student whose giftedness is not matching the career choice. This is very common. People will select a major, sign up to learn about a subject that in a way doesn't really fit who they are. There's a lot of reasons why that happens. And I think that you got two things in play. One is, the career choice, in fact, may not fit them. I mentioned the person who should have been an actor and ended up as an accountant. The reality is he knew from the beginning that he should have been an actor. The only reason he went into accounting was because his father was a banker. And when he was in college, he told his father he was going to major in theater. And his father said, son, that's a totally impractical job. You're never going to make any money in theater. You took a test. It said you're good in accounting or you're good with numbers. You should go into accounting. As long as we have a tax code, you'll have a job. So that's how he ended up in accounting. Didn't fit him at all. So that's a true misfit. It might have been helpful if along the way a professor or somebody besides his father, somebody at the university, had taken him aside and said, I'm watching your work and I'm not sure your heart is in this accounting major. Are you sure this is what you want to do? And find out more about how he made that choice. It might well be that somebody should have said, oh, no wonder you're not doing well. You don't want to be doing this in the first place. This doesn't fit you. You might consider this other major, this other career over here. I think that those of us who are working with students and young adults coming up have a significant opportunity to let young adults know that they do have choices, and to the extent they do, and to help guide them in making those choices in accordance with what their gifts incline toward, and to be mentors, if you will, to get them in the paths that really do fit them. So that would be how I'd answer that second question. Oh, I'm sorry. There was a second part to the answer to the second question. It's also possible that you got a student who it does appear that their giftedness and the career choice don't seem to fit, but they're still in learning mode. And sometimes how the person learns doesn't match how the instruction's being given for a given career choice. So as a case in point, I've known young adults who would make perfect attorneys in a courtroom. They're very persuasive. They're great in front of a crowd. They could argue a case all day long. The problem is the process of getting into that job leads through law school, where the way that they teach in law school doesn't at all fit the way this person actually learns. So there's a mismatch not between them and the career, but between them and how they learn. They don't read. They don't learn so much by reading and memorizing and taking exams. They learn in different ways. That's a different problem. There, what a teacher can do is help a student. They can work with the student to figure out, let's figure out how you learn, and then let's see if we can tailor this instruction in some way that fits how you learn, or give you some additional resources to help you do the best you can with the learning style that we're presenting this instruction, so that we can get you where you're ultimately going to thrive. So there's a couple of possibilities there. Let's see, as far as the first question, how do we reconcile a giftedness with Ecclesiastes 9:10, which is Ecclesiastes 9:10 is that work is a gift? I don't have my Bible in front of me.
It says, whatsoever your hand finds to do, do it with all your heart.
Yes, do it with all your heart. I believe that it's. I believe that passage is teaching us that work is a gift from God, and that He really desires that we would lean into our work with everything that we have as a way of loving Him and serving our neighbor. And obviously, it's a lot easier to do that if you're doing work that fits you. You can do it with all your heart. I've got many examples I could give of people who wake up every day and they're in all kinds of different occupations, but they go into work with a sense of mission and a sense of purpose, because they know that their particular skills are going to be very useful to the people that they're helping and serving, and their heart is in the work because they can see that God has given it to them as a gift, and indeed God has given them and their gifts as a gift to the world. I talk about giftedness in terms of being a means by which God dispenses His grace into the world. 90% of the time when God answers prayer, He does so through people who are gifted to the task. So when a woman is praying for her little boy to be able to learn in school, he's struggling to learn how to read or do his math or whatever. In reality, what she's praying for is someone who's gifted to the task of causing learning to take place. In an occupation, we would call such a person a teacher. And in fact, God has caused some people to be gifted to the task of causing learning to take place. And I believe that that's really how He answers most prayers, is through other people. You are an answer to prayer for somebody in this world. And what we need to do is get people. We need to connect people with the people who've been praying for you, that God would send somebody like you along to answer their prayer, basically. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Good. I think we have time for another question. Go ahead, anyone?
I thought I saw Arwen raise her hand, but I may be wrong.
Okay. Arwen?
I think she's got her mic muted.
Okay.
Hi, Arwen.
Hi. So I thank you so much for the lesson. I've been thinking a lot about just motivation and ability. And one of the things that's coming up for me is sometimes I'm in the process of ministering to people in prison ministry. And it's something that's been on my heart is how to help someone partner with giftedness who's not necessarily in a position to be able to live out that giftedness. Like if they just have a motivation for something, but they are in that space of healing and need to just partner with hope in figuring out what that giftedness is. Is that something that you've ever been in a position to work with?
So I want to make sure I understand the question, Arwen. So you said that you'd been working with prison populations, and so I'm envisioning a person who's in prison, which means their circumstances are very limited, and they are realizing they have some kind of a gift, but their options for expressing that gift are quite limited because of where they are. Is that the substance?
Yes, and even how would you walk someone through that space of like trying to figure out what that giftedness is when they're not necessarily in a position to live that out? Sure.
And so that kind of goes back to that question I think that Clifford asked, about discovering giftedness. If you're able to have an extended conversation with them, you can get them to tell you a series of stories from their life about activities they've done that they've enjoyed doing and done well. And they're now going back in their life history, which means at least hopefully back in childhood up maybe through the teen years before they ever got incarcerated. They've done certain things that they really found energizing or satisfying. These could be simple things. They could be simple things. I baked a cake for my brother's 16-year-old birthday. I memorized a poem in fifth grade. I learned to play the guitar and love to play the guitar. And so you get these stories and you get them to tell you those stories, what they did and how they did it and what was so satisfying in the doing of that activity. And you get a number of those stories, and then you start to look with them and see that there's patterns of behavior in there. And they will start to see what it is that they are really about, what it is that's driving their behavior. And then on the strength of those observations and insights, you can start to help them think, even in the meager circumstances that you have in a jail or a prison, are there ways that we could express that in some way that would be meaningful, that you gain some energy? I will give an example of kind of how this works. I mentioned the kind of giftedness about making a team, right? Some people, they're just designed by God to collaborate with other people in the service of getting something done. Well, not surprisingly, if let's say a boy grows up in a very disadvantaged neighborhood, and the only teams in that neighborhood to speak of are the gangs, guess what? He's motivated to join a gang, right? Because he wants to be part of the team. So he gets in trouble and he gets put in jail or in prison. Well, that same giftedness is still in play there. And only now he needs to team up with other prisoners, not to get in a gang in prison so much, but to try to figure out how could we collaboratively do something together here that we would all sort of share in and enjoy. And so maybe they start a singing group, you know, maybe they form a reading club. Maybe they create some other kind of group activity so that he now feels a reconnection with people instead of feeling so isolated, which is very demotivating for somebody who's got to be part of a team. Does that make sense? Great, thanks.
Well, this has been excellent. I just want to thank you so much, Bill, for being with us today.
Well, you're welcome, Larry. Thanks.
This is something that I'm gonna, well, sir, it's being recorded, and as soon as this is available, I will make it available to you and Populi, and so you can use it yourself and pass it along. You can show others as well. I think this was a powerful session, and I just wanted to say too that I'm really proud of this class because all 12 of you showed up on time. I think that's the first time that's ever happened in the 7 years I've been doing this, that everybody showed up on time, and you know, our mics worked, cameras worked, everything was just great. So thank you so much.